You guys are playing. I'll yell. If you can't hear me, I'll steal Howard's mic.
That works.
If you can't hear me, that's okay too.
Thank you all for coming. This is our second panel discussion. We previously called it the expert panel. We probably did a little bit of a disservice there because then everybody was scared that they couldn't be on the panel unless they're an expert. So the user group leaders have renamed this to just the panel discussion. So nobody here is required to be an expert. That's pretty positive from what we heard from most panel participant selections. So there's a little bit of change there, but this is the second panel discussion we've had. The first one was very well received. It scores very highly on our survey form, which I encourage everybody to fill out. And the response from, gotta find my notes. The response from the survey was that they wanted to learn more about relationships, specifically external relationships in SOLIDWORKS, and how to deal with sending files to vendors. Those kind of the two hit things, and they play well together. Also, we had John McAuther here already on site talking about PDM and file relationships in the first session, so we got him to do a double hitter, which we all very much appreciate. And a couple other panel members here that they'll introduce themselves in a bit. My name is Schutte. I work at SmoothLogix, which is a SOLIDWORKS partner and consulting-ish company, sort of, depends on the day. We make an ERP system that integrates to SOLIDWORKS, and that's always a lot of fun. We'll go down here, of course in no particular order, but we'll start at the end there with John McAuther and end up here by Howie.
Start with questions? Or?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have the handout. You guys know. What it says is to provide your name, current employment, and SOLIDWORKS experience, if you would, please.
Sure. Yeah, my name is John McAuther. I work for DASI Solutions. I am the PDM Services Manager now for DASI. Been with DASI for about 10 years now. Been using SOLIDWORKS since 2001 plus as a user. I've been in tool and die design, product development, tooling design of all kinds, injection mold, plastic tooling. I've built my own CNC machine, run my own G-code on custom guitars out in the back shop. So basically I do everything I possibly can with the tools that I have at my disposal.
I'm Joe Covington. I'm with Lakeshore Cutting Solutions. I'm a project manager, project engineer over there. I've been using SOLIDWORKS since about 2001. That's when I was first introduced to it, coming out of AutoCAD. I love it. I haven't gone back to AutoCAD for anything that I don't have to. I've got a background in heat treat fabrication, finishing, a little bit of machining. Most of what we do at Lakeshore is custom fabrication, onesie twosie kinds of stuff, so you get a lot of variety there. That's about it.
I'm Randy Johnson. I work here at Fogg Filler. I've been with the company about 18 years. I think we switched in 2002 to SOLIDWORKS from AutoCAD, so I've got about 15 years here with SOLIDWORKS, and this is my only experience with it as we use it here. Before that, about 15 years in AutoCAD. We do custom machine, auto filling equipment, you've probably seen your stuff, design different areas of that.
Todd Hoogland, work at Extol Incorporated. We build standard and custom hot plate or plastic splitting equipment. We have hot plate welders, spin welders, infrared heat stakes, and been using SOLIDWORKS since '99. Been in machine build for 27 years now. My experience is I'm a journeyman machine builder. Picked up the engineering on the job. Don't have any training in it, but I've been doing it since about '97. And so that's pretty much it.
I'm Howie Stieber. You can call me Howie. I'm a materials manager here at Fogg Filler Company. Just like Randy, we've been exposed to SOLIDWORKS since 2002. Kind of a different end. I obviously don't design or draw. I use the drawings obviously to communicate with the vendor core what we need to have manufactured. Been with Fogg almost 20 years. Yeah, we produce filling equipment that fill in liquid that usually isn't carbonated, but now we are doing carbonation, so that's new to us. So yeah, as far as SolidWorks experience, not an engineer by any means, but we use it every day. I have SolidWorks on my computer and work actively with our engineers and the vendors to obviously come out with the end result product.
Thanks, guys. I'm really excited for the panel. The user group leaders did a really great job at picking a variety of people that all have different views and input on the subjects we're going to talk about today. Oddly enough, Joe gets files from Howie, and so when we talk about managing our files with our vendors and whatnot, we actually have a customer and a vendor here in front of us. John McAuther will work with PDM Solutions for customers that are trying to actively manage files, and he'll be able to lend us information from a SolidWorks standpoint. Extol sends a lot of files out to people. I'm guessing also Lakeshore, although I've not confirmed that before now. But my presumption.
Not sure.
And Randy is a seasoned SolidWorks designer who will give good input from the design standpoint. Anybody can ask a question at any time. We'll try to stop and take your question and address it to the proper panel participants at the right time. Howie will probably be left out a little bit in the first part here because we're going to really talk about the SolidWorks design aspect, and then we'll loop Howie in on the second section, which is managing files with vendors. The first question, just so you guys know, we have a predefined list of questions. That's usually how you get panel participants to join, by giving them a list of questions saying this is what we're going to talk about, with the caveat the audience can ask whatever they want. So I'm going to pretty much go down my canned questions here with a little bit of variation, and you guys can jump in and ask questions whenever you want or make your points as deemed fit. The first question is pretty straightforward, and we'll start with John on this. Do you utilize external relationships in your design? And to quantify it, it's going to be anytime you get the little arrow and the little caret symbol, or whatever you guys call it, in SolidWorks, which is a whole equation, a value, a dimension, any linked value to an external file. So that will be our start off question. Do you use external? Why or why not?
Yeah, I can speak to that from a couple of different levels, right? I've got my own seat of SolidWorks for contract design work, as well as more often than not, I'm designing and building custom electric guitars in there. And then of course I see, I don't know, 1,000 different examples of it in my life as a reseller as well. So from a guitar design standpoint, product development, I definitely use external relationships, largely to get curvature to match between products, right? I'm trying to get the same exact curve relative to the next guitar so that the fixtures remain constant, right? The neck to body joint on the guitar is generally in context reference relative to the curvature on the neck relative to the body. And then probably the biggest place I use in context references is on tooling design, right? So both sides of this guitar are curved. The first one I cut is really easy because it's flat and it vacuums down on the machine, right? After I've cut that side, when I flip it over, this thing now needs some form of fixture that can match curvature relative to that. And I find the easiest way is to just bring in that body, do a subtract on the guitar from the block that I'm looking for, bump out the surfaces 20 thou or so, and put some gaskets in there for a vacuum fixture. And I haven't really found any faster way to do it besides an external relationship, right? With respect to that, you know, downstream you have to be a little careful, you know, reusing that fixture, using that guitar and other designs and things is definitely something you got to keep in mind. Probably the biggest place I see customers use it the most successfully is in castings and machining of a casting. So customers will get a casting in, and they might machine it 4 or 5 different ways. You can do an insert part on that, and then do your cut operations relative to that inserted part. And now if you ever change the casting, it updates all the downstream machined parts as well. But the independent machining doesn't affect the master casting part. And I find that to be a pretty good use of external relationships as well.
Because of the nature of our business, we are a custom fabrication shop. I should have mentioned this. Lakeshore Cutting Solutions does laser cutting, water jet cutting, which water jet is just about any material you can think of. And we do use external relationships, primarily where we're not so much redesigning, but redrawing a customer's product or to make it manufacturable. quite often we'll get CAD or even just a PDF, sometimes even just a piece of notebook paper that has a drawing on it, or even an assembly on it that we have to redraw. So we will use the external relationships within that assembly. Typically, that is not information that goes back and forth between us and the customer to the extent that they're implementing that design themselves, but we are communicating back to the customer to let them know what we're doing to their part, or assembly, whatever it might be. Again, it's similar to what John said, we're using it primarily to follow contours within an assembly and make sure that we're creating well-matching parts. Again, we do a lot of custom stuff, so it's quite often a one-off single item that we're making, and we may do a repeat of that project at some point in the future, but that's pretty much the extent of our external relationships that we use within our engineering group.
Here at Fogg Filler, and I'm brought in here as kind of the don't ever use it. That's my motto. When we first start with people, I start by saying, don't, just don't. We've gotten burned by it too many times. I don't know if this is a place or time to go through a list of some of the reasons, but
Well, the question was, do you and why do you?
so strongly discouraged. We do use it, different groups, and when it's a confined project, it's okay to use it. Mirrored parts and, like you said, cast parts that are based on each other where it's a confined thing. But for the most part, we try not to, because we reuse a lot of our parts through different machines, and it gets unstable as you go.
I have a question. Okay, are we allowed to ask questions? Or?
Yeah. Let's let Todd talk through the base question, and we'll take your question.
Okay, sounds
That'd
good.
be great.
That's pretty much the end of it. We do use it some, but we try to discourage not, especially until someone's been here long enough and starts to understand some of the ramifications of doing it and how it affects our systems.
Yeah, again, I guess would be the same as them as far as limiting it, but we have, a lot of customer data, whether it's a door panel or whatever, and we've got to have fixtures that'll support and hold that, so we've got to references to those components, to be able to hold those pieces, and but as far as, our custom side of things, we'll use a lot more on our standard equipment. We try to stay away from that. That's where.
Thank you. Good question, Lewis.
Okay, it was more of a comment already. Have you ever thought of maybe, I think that using external references and mentions like that are really useful, because on large assemblies you can repeat the same kind of work and update things really quick, but I would never leave it like that, because I would never trust it either, because it could move. But would it have you thought maybe make it into a black or something, or mating it, fixing it or something where it won't be able to move?
Yeah,
after you're
that's
done?
exactly, if you use it to set up your stuff, good, but we do try to, when you're done, scrub all the external references and get it everything so it's all standalone, and we do bottom up.
Another thing that you can do too is, instead of breaking the reference, you can just make it into a black. You can fix it and leave it like that, and it won't move. It'll stay. I don't know if you do that.
I don't know, experience how well that would be for changing in the future then.
All right, so I want to ask.
Another question.
And
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, sir.
I guess kind of a general comment. I think if you're using external references, is more based on whether you're doing a top-down or bottom-up. If you're doing a bottom-up design where you have standard components, I can see where you would want to shy away from using external references. But if you're doing top-down design where every machine's custom to that specific process, which is what I do, I use external references all the time.
Agreed, I'm sure it's industry specific completely, or total good reasons why they are, and good reasons why we don't.
So
Well, basically,
Yeah.
I'm in the stamping industry, and we use external. I don't know, started working at this company this past summer, they use external references everywhere. And basically, the reason they use it is, so you take a station, next job, just go in there and change your part, everything changes automatically. stuff, and they use it, I think, too much sometimes, but they use it extensively. But back to one of your points is, if you're not careful, that could, once in a while, a reference gets back to the old job once in a while. So if you're not careful, that does happen.
But if you make it into a black, it won't do that.
What's that?
If you make it into a black, it won't do that.
Well, no, what it is, I'm sorry, what it is it's, when you use pack and go, or something else like that, somehow, you might copy all the links, one link might not be copied correctly. The name in it might not be correct. You usually don't find out until after you update other stuff. You're gonna think, that link's looking back at the other job, you know?
Yeah, that's
So-
one on my list, it can get unstable,
Yeah.
depending on the complexity of it and how far you go.
Yeah, but the company I work for, that's gospel for them right now.
See, if you do it right, it won't get unstable. If you make it into a black, you do the back and go, and then you explode the black, pretty much are like letting everything go, and you pretty much have to remake it or do whatever you gotta do, and it will break the link. It will never go back to the original.
All right, so we'll probably have to keep moving on a little bit. The one challenge with the block is you're only limited to sketch geometry. If I want to externally reference surfaces or something, blocks are fairly limiting. I want to go back to something that John McAuther and Randy had said. You had said if you do castings, you do an insert part, you insert the raw cast into a new part and do cuts on it. What is the advantage or disadvantage? Because that creates an external relationship, as in inside the part model. How is that an advantage or disadvantage, taking that part and insert it into a new assembly? And the assembly as a reference child part, the master, as opposed to a context reference.
Sure. Yeah, and I have seen both. The insert part into a part, it has some ramifications I found downstream on a bill of materials, right? And some references with respect to PDM. It's something that you can track, but I've talked to a lot of companies that are interested in seeing that raw casting and the machined version of that raw casting on a bill of materials, right? Because in their mind, we have to order the raw casting and we're also ordering the machining process that occurs to it, right? So in those situations, I think I like the assembly with the assembly level cuts relative to that, right? And if you're not necessarily populating those down to the part file and you're making a print out of that assembly, you get a pretty good back push to the bill of materials in that respect, right? Where it'll show the assembly as a machine product and the raw part at the root level as two separate items on the bill of materials. So,
It sounds like Randy agrees. He was shaking his head.
One of the issues with that assembly though is you're limited to what geometry you can put into that.
sure. Yeah, the assembly level cuts, revolves, things like that are all you can really do with it, right? Compared to on a part file level, you can do everything SolidWorks has to offer, right?
So one of the interesting points on that is, the argument is if it's in the assembly and you're casting, you should only ever be allowed to do cuts. In a part, you can add material to a casting, which you can't machine and add material, so it's a give and take.
There's other funny as over fillets and stuff, there's
Right.
some things you just can't do if the assembly level yet.
There's more limitations than that. You have swept cuts and log cuts too that you can't do.
The next question that's going to be interesting is to try to draw some comparison here is Randy at Fogg Company here works in a very product-based environment. We develop a product at Fogg, and then we take one single part, we might use it on 15 different jobs, different versions, different variants, as opposed to Todd and probably Joe and McAuther would have variant experience of working on projects, and probably you as well, JMS and whatnot, where we have a particular project, and everything is contained in there. So from Extol standpoint, you do both projects and products. Do you see that as well, where external relationships are not allowed in your product line, but they are freely allowed in your project line? And how do you as a designer, assuming that's a factual statement, how do you as a designer working in both areas keep all that straight, and how do you internally manage that?
Right now we don't.
Yeah.
We allow, we don't have any regulations on what we can do in our standard product. And our standard product evolved from a custom kind of. So, taking a standard product and starting from scratch, I would recommend having less external references than more, because especially when you get into doing revisions and things like that, you can screw up multiple parts without realizing it, unless you got,
parts, yeah.
right, where SolidWorks PDM really helps in that, but without that tool, you can really get yourself in trouble.
Thanks. Any questions at all?
I'd say it's just about revs. I think that's the only problem with showing rev. Because some people, when you update something, break that rev. I'm sorry, that reference. And the next one's going to be that station. It's not linking here. Someone updated wrong, actually. So that's one of the other problems.
So the next major question, which we've all briefly touched on, because it's hard not to in the subject matter, but what common external relationship problems do you see or advice to give? Let's say we have a brand new SolidWorks user who is just starting out the last couple months, and he's all enamored with external references because it saves you time and you have to do less work. What common challenges do you encounter that you give that new aspiring designer advice?
Yeah, the grass isn't always greener there, I suppose. Yeah, I cover a lot in the assembly training course when I go through that, you know, explaining, A, how to identify them, right? So understand that arrow, caret, you know, is causing the external reference. And then, of course, whatever characters come after that, right? You've got a question mark, the X, the star, right? And what those different things do. My personal least favorite is the X. I still have not found a really valid reason to break references in this tool. But I've seen a couple of workaround things done for it, but at the end of the day, a broken reference travels with that file forever, and it's broken, and you can't repair it. So you're just dragging around dirty laundry at that point, in my opinion. So my personal preference is if you want to use it for the ease of design, if it's a product that's not going to get reused elsewhere, put a big star next to that because you don't know that that's true forever, right? But if it's a product you're not going to use elsewhere, you know, you might be okay to leave it. But for the most part, you should probably be removing those references one way or another. You know, I brought up blocks. You can do, one of the tricks I show in the training class a lot is if you go into any given sketch, you do display, delete all relations, wipe them all out. Now, the cheap way out is you just box select everything and fix it, which of course has downstream changes, issues, right? But more often than not, I'm going into user dimensions and then fully defined sketch, and then I'll just slam, you know, off of an origin or something and get a fully defined sketch. It's not going to get me the true design intent I want, but it got me dimensions on the thing that are black, and I can change design intent after that, downstream from there.
Yeah, like I said, with being a custom shop, as a general rule, we have to have a very good reason to use external references, primarily because this time that we run a project, it may be mine, the next time it could be one of the other engineers. And one of the biggest challenges is understanding what somebody else did, you know, and I think that's listed in here somewhere. But yeah. So that's, I mean, that's the primary reason that we don't use them all over the place. Trying to understand somebody else's thought pattern or design intent when they build this particular product can be a real challenge. Luckily, we're a small group. We're all in close vicinity to each other, so that, you know, guys right over your shoulder if you do need to ask a question. But for our group in particular, that's kind of where we tend to lean is you know, if you're going to use them, you better have a good reason, and it better be easily understood by everybody else.
We'll skip Brandon because he doesn't use them.
He's got a bathroom break. Personnel is a big one when you're doing it. You don't know who the next person is. It does take you time to set it up too. A lot of people want to get really clever and they spend half a week getting everything all set up to do something super clever that may end up hurting us a bunch. But then the next guy has to figure out what clever things you were doing. And we get a whole gamut of different people here, and even some of our power users have a hard time figuring out what somebody else's was. We've got some projects, one sketch designs the whole machine for you. We've got a guarding package. I wouldn't touch that because I have no clue, and so it kind of limits who can work on it. If anybody else touches it, it blows it up, and you hear them mumbling because their stuff got blown up. got too complicated and it was really hard for someone to figure out. So it can cost you a bunch of time going back through and figuring out what somebody was thinking, and even setting it up can cost you a bunch of time. A lot of new people and stuff, and here, with all those references it has to bring in to do it. So our files get, they're bottom up, they're a lot more stable, the assemblies build faster. Yeah, we talked about revision management. Yeah, if you touch something and how many times was it affected, how many parts didn't get revised properly or you didn't go through. Yeah.
Todd?
When you're building a custom one-off, top-down can be really helpful. You don't sometimes know where you're going to end up when you start a project, because you've got different things that you got to accomplish with it. So being able to have the references and things move when you change something and have other things move with it can be helpful, but it's good to have some good practices in place on how you go about doing that. Whether you're working off a sketch for changing your dimensions, or you're working off of things made with planes, have some type of method of doing it so that you're consistent in your design. So,
Now, it's been a while since I've been a full-time designer, but is it true that customers will change their mind? So should that happen, I mean, usually external references.
That sense Trump. It's all done now.
And that's what I always liked about external references, like, oh, the customer changed their mind, everything has to get a foot bigger, you change a few things and magic, and if you know what you're doing, it's awesome. If you leave and the intern takes over your project, there's a lot of cursing and swearing.
If you can predict what the customer is going to change.
Yeah, there's some of that. Usually it's, bigger or something. So the next question was, do you find other uses of external references difficult to understand, comprehend, modify, work with? You guys largely talked about that, so unless somebody has another comment, maybe I'll mark that question off as done. We kind of talked about what practices we favor in external references. You guys did a really good job at thoroughly answering the first couple of questions, so. And unless anybody has something to add to that. I really want to get to Howie, so we're just kind of going through here.
Yeah, one of my points of it, finding files and how difficult that can be, and that leads into their world with external references.
So the last thing is, SolidWorks over the years has done considerable improvements in external references and what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, how you can just suck in a surface or do a convert entity or intersection curve, whatever it might be. As the software has matured and or the tools have become easier in context assembly, editing stuff, have you found yourself using them more, changing your design strategy based on tools available now that weren't there 10 years ago? Has SolidWorks made it easier for us to do our jobs with external references? Or has SolidWorks given us so many tools that are so dangerous and catastrophically intern-like that it's been a harm? And we'll let John answer last and start Todd and go that way.
I think they've definitely gotten better. There's more tools to figure out where your issue is when you come across one. And there's less issues with those references breaking than what there used to be in the past. But I think you still got to be very careful on and intentional on what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a lot of change in SolidWorks because I don't use them that much, admittedly. I have seen some things. We've had some newer users coming in and show us some different ways of doing external references with skeleton sketches and stuff and other ways of doing it. I've seen some good things conforming to the idea, but as far as SolidWorks go, there's still trickies, and still 20 years from now, is it going to be stable and we'll find all its old stuff?
I like his comment. When you run across something new, and that's pretty much how we continue to learn SolidWorks, is we find things by accident, new tools. As far as the use of the external references, I don't think our frequency of use has changed all that much. A lot of it just goes back, like we were saying, to design intent. it's, for me, it's very specific to any given project, as far as whether I'm not gonna use it or use it. So it's, I don't know that I've increased the amount of use based on new tools. It's just, it's fun to find the new tools. Oh wow, wonder how long that's been in there, you know? But, and that's something that I've been talking to our company about, is just increasing the amount of training, because I haven't been through an additional formal training since I first learned SolidWorks and took the 1-week crash course. So everything I've learned since then has pretty much been either by accident or off somebody else's experience.
How are you?
Yeah. So I use the same line in every class when I start talking about this in the morning. It's with great power comes great responsibility. You know, and that's exactly what you have at your fingertips with external relationships, right? They, you know, the new tools that they continue to develop in SolidWorks, you know, are definitely coming a long way, I think. One of my personal favorites is like, you know, the intersection tool with the surfaces and solids that it can do. You know, I've done a lot of hybrid modeling over the years, and they basically combined something that took 7 steps into one now, right? But, you know, the first release of that had a terrible preview, and you didn't really know what you got until you hit the green check, right? And then we improved that the following year. So, you know, it's really a matter of best practices, in my opinion, right? You know, the simple answer is yes. You know, I love the new functionality. Being a guy that answers help desk calls all the time, you know, there's certainly some problems that can come along with them, and a fundamental understanding that needs to occur, right? And that retraining thing's a big part of it, right? You know, I learned SolidWorks in 01, and I can't tell you how much just learning the books to train others taught me, right? For being self-taught. I thought I was pretty good with the software until I cracked open a book, and I'm like, oh, apparently there's 17 other ways to do that, right? Because one of the things that I commonly see with users in general is just that you figure out a way to do it, and that just becomes the way you do it, right? Because that's the way you figured out. And you generally don't have time in your life to figure out the other 7 ways and figure out which one's best for you, right? And I implore you to try to do that. YouTube's a great source, your local reseller, other users, you know, other people's experience. Consultants, sure, user groups, you know, the only way to know the best way for you is to know all the different ways that are out there and tackle it a different way. So.
Sir.
With external links, there's, in my industry at least, there's another positive to it, which is standardization. You have blank tissue, draw stations, restrictions, and trims, and box, etc. How they set up over there is, they set up external links, that's your standards. So when somebody takes a new part in a draw station, makes the part bigger, longer, those standards are there and it stays with the file. So I know our industry might not be like your guys' industry, but that's one of the things that they strive for. So someone like me, I'm new to there, started in June, I can open a station and learn what clearances for knockouts, clearances for strippers, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So.
Yeah, it updates downstream. I come from a progressive die background. I extensively use external relationships, right? If you link all the tooling to the part, you change the part coming in from the customer, you get every station downstream to update, right? Now stick one person on that assembly that doesn't know what they're doing, and it's going to be an explosion. So you know, it's both sides of the coin, right? So
we have a young kid starting this summer, so I'll see what happens.
Right.
In fairness, so we'll see what happens.
So he's a Creo guy.
Yeah. But I mean, starting May, I think, or something. But yeah, we'll see how. I come from a system that linked before, so when I got there, it wasn't like nothing to me. You know, like, okay, I didn't learn their way. You know,
So we have any questions on external references? We're going to move now to providing files to vendors, and we got a great transition question, unless somebody has something they want to say. Awesome. So Howie, when you send files to vendors, Fogg Company uses PDM, and Fogg Company has developed for you a PDM program. You can type in the part number that you want, it goes to PDM, it finds that part, and puts it in a nice email for you. Simplified. Every once in a while, you ask for one part, and then you get like an assembly and 300 more parts. In case you didn't know, that was an external reference. And to continue that question, Joe, I'm sure you will get files from vendors, and you'll have an assembly and a handful of parts. You try to open it, and then SolidWorks says, Joe, where's this other file? And you're like, I don't know.
Several times.
Okay.
You'll see that little note pop up.
Never from Fogg. Fogg doesn't do that. But so, Howie, if you'd like to start, I'm sure you handle the calls from the customer or the vendors that call and say, Howie, I need more files? Or you try to add one part and you get an entire 300 meg assembly? Can you explain what happens there, how you bump that back up to engineering, or how that works, and then we'll hand it over to Joe on the receiving end. What does he do, and how does that work?
Sure. Most of the times, a file like that, if I get it, I don't process it any further to the vendor core. I will go immediately up to the engineers. If there's something wrong with your drawing, it's 900 megabits, and I can't send it, it'll never go through anybody's email. That's my red flag. I get a red address right away. Sometimes it is part of the design intent, and when it is, then we're given additional tools. But we are always, as far as purchasing is concerned, not trying to overwhelm a vendor with information. So if it's valid, it's then cleared. We then use a different program to move it forward. And 99% of the time, there's something wrong with the file, and it is moved. and it's not moved. So, I mean, my goal, obviously, as a purchaser, is in order for my vendors to be successful, they got to have the right information. I'm not into sending them contaminated data, because then it's just going to be a big waste of time. Time is important, obviously, with short lead times and so forth.
Joe?
Well, quite often we do deal with a purchasing agent, a buyer, who's not familiar with the design. He may not have even opened the drawing to see what he's buying. That's not uncommon for us. So typically what I'll do is I'll contact the buyer, the purchasing agent, and I'll ask him, who is the engineer I need to talk to about this? And he'll put me in direct contact. At that point, quite often what I find myself doing is walking that particular engineer or intern, maybe, through the pack and go process, so that I can pull in the information that I need, because, I've got multiple instances of this note that says, can't find it. So that's a very common occurrence for us, is just getting back in touch with the designer or the engineer who's in charge of the project, and they're typically they're gonna have a much better grasp of what you need as well. Nothing against the purchasing guys, but they're doing their job. They've got a part number, they've got an order, and a price, and that's pretty much the extent of their knowledge of what they're ordering in a lot of cases. So, if you can get in touch with the engineer that designed it or drew it up, or who's in charge of the project, they're going to be much better equipped to provide the files that we're looking for.
No, and Joe is really accurate with that, because, for example, if we get a question, we'll take a look at the drawing. If it's something easy, we can answer it, but a lot of times we'll forward it on to the engineer who is the author of the drawing, because he can give insight to design intent that we as purchasing will never have in a lot of cases.
Awesome. So for Todd and Randy here, as the two engineers, and Randy's answer will be the same as Howie, so do you guys do your company send native SolidWorks files to your vendors for manufacturing, or do you send a 3D CAD neutral file exchange format? And if why or why not, or what are the variances?
We send native files, we don't send native SolidWorks files. We send a step or a Parasolid file.
Or DXF maybe?
DXF, yep,
Okay.
very common.
And then why do you not send native files?
Because of the referencing issues that come with that, and a lot of the vendors don't have SolidWorks, so they're just giving something that they can use that's usable.
Okay.
And we create them all automatically through our system, so it's not a big deal for the design.
Is that a PDM system?
It is or is not. We've got both going right now.
Okay. Well, we're gonna get to John here in a little bit too, but some of the advantages of that is PDM has the ability to automatically create a 3D neutral CAD format for you. Then Howie and his team don't have to bother engineers or whatever it is, and we'll get to John on that. And I changed my mind. We're gonna have Howie answer the question instead of Randy here in a minute. Does Fogg Company send out native files or 3D CAD neutral, and why or why not?
Most of the time we send regular SolidWorks files. Most of our preferred vendors, so we have kind of two different vendor core. We have vendor core that we're currently vetting. As Fogg grows, they might become preferred vendors. Typically, anybody that's a preferred vendor with Fogg, one of the parts of the agreement is that they have SolidWorks. So that way we can communicate easier. They can understand the drawings, they have availability to the model, which is a huge benefit if they have compatible programming software for their machining application or anything to that effect. And it just works a lot easier, so we're doing such mass buys that they have the same files that we have. They can communicate with the engineer, they can look at the drawing the same as the engineer. So we kind of have a mixed bag. We have some people that don't have SolidWorks. That makes it a little bit challenging for them, for price point sometimes, for programming. So we try to look for SolidWorks partners because there's just a lot of benefit there. But sometimes you just cannot find enough resources at a certain amount of time. A lot of people out in the world are starting to realize the benefits of SolidWorks. They're sending their kid to school, they're doing different things to be SolidWorks compatible because then they're cost.
So Joe, from your standpoint, if you are to work with a Fogg company, an Extol, whoever, do you prefer them send you a 3D CAD neutral file format, DXF, STEP, pair, solid, just whatnot, or would you rather have a native SolidWorks file?
Well, what we run into is the first thing we need to do is determine what our customers' capabilities are as far as opening and getting a file. Like, a lot of them do not have SolidWorks.
I'm talking about when files come to you.
When they come to us, well, see, but there's a give and take with us. We, like I said, we may receive the files in, could be a DXF, could be anything that we receive in.
Yep.
More often than not, we do a redraw to suit our manufacturing capabilities, whether it's forming or you know, what type of material we run through laser, water jet, or what effect that process is going to have on the material. And then we'll forward those files back to the customer for approval before we move forward with it. So there is a two-way exchange going on, and for us, yeah, we need to determine what types of files the customer can actually open and work with. So sometimes we will, if it's possible, and they have the capability of using them, we will provide the native SolidWorks files.
So certainly, if you're working with a design on a customer, you want a CAD format that everybody can work with.
Exactly.
But if Howie or his group sends Lakeshore Cutting Solutions a SolidWorks file to be cut, or a purchase order to cut something,
that's great.
Would you prefer?
That's great.
Would you prefer Fogg send you a SolidWorks file,
Absolutely.
or would you prefer Fogg send you an AutoCAD, or DWG or an IGES or whatnot?
Provided we're currently running 2016 yet. We typically wait until about the third service.
Why would you do that?
Normally, we wait until about the third service pack before we upgrade.
You gotta talk to John.
But yeah, if we can get a SolidWorks file, that's great, because that's, you know, then we've got a file that we can use. We can collaborate with the customer, you know, within that file, and that's perfect. That's ideal for us.
So what I'm trying to drive at here, I'll give you my my question reasoning here, is part of the discussion of this panel was a lot of people were questioning, do we send or don't we send files? And there's an argument to not send files because it gives away your IP. And there's an argument to send files because it's more cost effective. And this is why it's interesting for Todd's standpoint, you guys don't send native files and you pay your engineering staff historically to convert those, and now with PDM you've automated, or whatever program you've automated that task. Yet at the same time, for Joe to receive a file, if I send you a sheet metal file with a bend radius or a K factor that's incompatible with your equipment, you have the SolidWorks file, it's a 30-second fix. If I send you an AutoCAD file with an 1/8" bend radius on a 1/2" plate, it now takes you how long to redraw that part that I already had in SolidWorks. And from an IP standpoint, I'm curious to know too, from a Howie standpoint or from a Todd standpoint, if I'm sending a DXF, I'm trying not to say banned words as well, but if I send a DXF or a DWG, and you redraw the file completely in SolidWorks, what IP did I really hide? And so that's the nature of the question. Should we or shouldn't we send files? And then what are the pros and cons for doing so? And so starting with Howie, why did Fogg Company decide to send SolidWorks files for our preferred vendors as opposed to sending AutoCAD or whatever we used to historically do?
Well, in a lot of cases, the initiation of communication is very local. The relationship between the vendors and Fogg is almost like family and almost that level of trust. So we are concerned with confidentiality. I think every company is, even from its conception. But at the time, the liability is very, very low to Fogg versus the cost effectiveness that was available, the communication that was accelerated. A lot of times, I'm sure everybody in this room knows what it's like to get a project, and well, geez, it sure would be nice to have about 6 more weeks on that project, but you don't have it. So, you know, that's kind of how we got started. Now, as we grow and we're building new relationships, we don't necessarily change the data, but we have 97,000 part numbers available to us at any time. So what part do we send to somebody to vet? We can take and give them an obsolete part. It's of absolutely no value to anybody. If you wish to have it and put it on your filling equipment, good luck, because it didn't work. So there's a lot of different strategies you can do without changing the information. We go through a serious vetting process. We visit the vendor. We start them off small. We work on confidentiality agreements and exceptional other things. So that's how we vet, but we do not, what we feel, hinder the manufacturer from not having every possibility to produce the part quickly, most cost effectively, and be able to communicate back to us with design improvements sometimes. Not throwing Randy under the bus, he's one of the better ones, but we have some guys that just think adding zeros will make it awesome. It also makes it very expensive. So it's a great way for the vendor and for Fogg to communicate with each other, but we're very serious if we bring in the Fogg family. We also, what level of parts are they and what liability they are. So that's kind of how we discern how and what.
So from a Joe standpoint, if Fogg was to send you a DXF and you had to redraw on SolidWorks, did we really hide anything from you? I mean, at the end of the day, from your standpoint, do you have any more or less information if anybody in the audience here would send you a SolidWorks or DXF?
In our eyes, we are recreating that product anyways. You know, yes, he's still got his native file, and I don't, but I've got as close to an exact duplicate as I can possibly make.
Otherwise, your parts would be rejected.
Exactly.
How does that affect the price?
Well, it's got a great effect on it, and that's a lot of it is the cost competitiveness. You know, for us, if we can cooperate with our customer, and they can provide those native SolidWorks files, that does affect our price. You know, we have limited redraw time, limited, you know, maybe zero redesign time, and if the communication is great between us and the customer, we can explain or outline our capabilities to the customer, and they can, you know, and even allow them to make the changes if needed. So.
We're running out of time a little bit, but one of the things was the price comment, which is, and I'd like to go now to Todd and John. From you guys, it's no cost internal to Extol to create a 3D CAD neutral file format, because you're doing that automatically, which is great. And now you send that 3D CAD neutral format to a Joe, who's now going to cost the company more to reverse engineer that. And then compared from a John McAuther standpoint, do you see other companies engaging in this? Have you set up PDM systems or other tools to accomplish that? And where does that give and take? Where do we protect the company, not require vendors to have SolidWorks, just have them redraw, incur that cost, that give and take?
From our standpoint, I don't want the vendor ruining my part. If there's a problem, I'd rather work with a vendor and get it right first. I think with Lakeshore, they do a lot of forming. That's one big area where you can have it wrong. We do all of our own forming in-house, or 90% of it. So we're sending out a DXF file for a blank. They're bringing the blank in and we're forming it. If there's an issue, we see it on our end, not on their end. So from our standpoint, the vendor having to recreate things is probably...
And that's certainly what's different from Fogg.
That's
Fogg's getting better parts in, so it has to work for the Fogg sheet metal vendors.
Right, so it depends how you're, going about your business, with that. I can see, sending a SolidWorks file that's got all the full callouts and everything in the file can be advantageous to somebody that's doing CNC programming. So there's benefits both ways. We just haven't developed that to that extent, I guess, from an Extol standpoint.
And then, John, you actively work with customers, try to automate their 3D CAD neutral formats, or what do you see from the support and SolidWorks implementation or PM implementation side?
Sure. Yeah, definitely work a lot with that. There's a task functionality inside of the PDM Pro that allows basically a script that fires up SolidWorks does a save as to anything SolidWorks can do a save as on, right? So we'll typically see a lot of CAD neutral formats, DXF, DWG blanks out of sheet metal parts, things like that can be a bit challenging, although we've written a couple of custom scripts to do that now. It amazes me how many companies use that to actually dumb down CAD data internally. So they'll save a PDF, and that's what everybody manufactures to them, because that's what they've always done, right? But more often than not, that's what I hear purchasing is sending out for quotes and things, ends up being a PDF file. And that goes back as far as I can remember. When I got into the industry, I was working for a sheet metal company, and I'd ask the engineer, send me the CAD data. And they're like, here's the PDF. And I'm like, you didn't hear me. Right? Like, I have to redraw that from scratch now, right? That's not a CAD file, right? But it may be in an attempt to protect their IP. Although I certainly agree with the comments here, in respect of protecting IP on sheet metal. I mean, it's a flat piece of metal with some holes in it, guys. I mean, how you got there, I don't know how much it matters, right?
Well, and to manufacture it, you have to duplicate the design.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you can still have the IP, it just costs you more to get there.
Right. Where when I look at, like, say, my guitars, for example, I've got a lot of time and effort into what I consider my IP of that design. Sending somebody that versus a CAD neutral format to run G-code on makes no difference to them at all, right? It's this crazy 3D surface that you're going to have to sculpt with a ball cutter, and whether or not there's features there doesn't really make a difference. So I'm not at a loss there, depending on the manufacturing process, right? So, but yeah, more often than not, I see Parasol being the most common 3D neutral format. And if everybody's not aware, that's because SolidWorks is on a Parasol kernel, right? So you're going to get a cleaner translation there. Step, IGES are necessary evils sometimes, right? IGES is generally the dirtier format, but everything on the planet that can open 3D opens IGES, right? And then DXF and DWG are necessary evils, especially for older equipment, right? I see a lot of shops require 2009 AutoCAD or R12 stuff because their old plasma cutter or whatever only does that, right? And one trick there I'll add that I've seen a lot of companies do, anything on a DXF and DWG prior to 2000 is not encrypted, so if you open it in Notepad, you can just change what year AutoCAD it is and your machine will run that file. So I figured that trick out a while ago too.
So probably one of the last questions here, or close to the last, is if, like from a Fogg or Extol and Joe would be on the receiving end of this, if there's a file that you know to be made internally, and you have internal company standards, or if you're going to make a file that you know to be made externally, do you perceive the company to spend more or less time detailing and being precise or being explicit on what goes on? For an example might be weldments. Internally, we know we just stitch weld everything because as long as it doesn't fall apart, we're golden. And we don't have to call out that weldment detail for the weld process, as opposed to we set it externally, we got to put a lot more time and effort into this. And how does that work with Joe from a vendor relationship standpoint? Do we build that over time, or do we just laboriously put all this detail into the prints? And so that we know when Joe comes back and QC it and say, hey, he stitch welded every other inch, so it must be good. Do Todd, Randy, Howie, Joe, what do you guys see in that or in that exchange?
We definitely see more effort going into files, especially drawings that we're sending outside from a detail standpoint.
And Joe appreciates it.
We do. For us, we actually do outsource some of our work. We're not a great machine shop. We do a small amount of machining internally, but if we have a larger machined part, we will outsource that. And typically what we provide is what that specific vendor is going to need. We don't give him a whole bunch of information he doesn't need, but we're very careful to make sure he has everything that he does need. As far as internal drawings that we put together, I've found that for our, not so much for our laser or water jet operators, because what they get is what they get. You know, they're gonna cut whatever the file set tells them to cut. But when you get into the forming process, machining process, especially in the weld fabrication processes, the more information you can give those guys, the better. You know, if they can understand your design intent, they're that much better off, and you are on the floor a lot less. So.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Ooh, a couple questions from the audience. Yes, Radar.
I'm a machine designer, okay, and say I want to use an Extol beat steak. How do I convince Extol, what do I request from them? That they send me the SolidWorks files, but not something that they're going to give away their confidential design.
So how do you convince them?
How do I request them? What do I request? Because a lot of times, you know, customers, they don't want to give away their confidential information or their internal design. But I don't want that.
But you want good data.
But I want good data, and I've seen them do a save as, an assembly as a part, that would just say external services. Now you got a million broken circuits. Yield signs. Is there a good practice or a good way to say, just give me the outside components or something that isn't going to blow up?
Great question. I want to go back to McAuther from a SolidWorks standpoint. As an AE, how do you advise your customers, whether Extol or Fogg or whoever, to share this data with quality machine and be friendly about it?
Well, during that save as part operation, the default is external faces, which is getting you some pretty shattered data here. There's a radio button selection down there for external components, which saves all the parts as bodies, right? And that will give still the dump solid across, right? Arguably, there's still some IP there, right? If you're seeing internal guts, things like that, that they don't necessarily want you to see. There's a functionality in SolidWorks called D-feature as well, and D-feature will let you include or not include individual features and internal componentry to things. And if we're talking native SolidWorks data, it actually still has the ability to maintain mates as well. So the example in what's new a few years back was like a worming gear, that they strip out all the internal guts of the worming gear, but it still has the gear ratio when it's done as an external file that goes out in native SolidWorks form. And then they can save that as a configuration inside of SolidWorks for sending out to vendors, or they can save that as a separate file altogether that gets updated downstream.
I mean, that's a lot of times when we're trying to get information from a vendor or a supplier, they don't want to give that information, so they give you like a cube.
Yeah, good, great question. Jeremy, you had a question.
I had a question on some of the fabrication side of it, particularly. In some sense, there was a SolidWorks defining dimensions on models. And in fact, you don't even have to make drawings. And I know that really didn't take off. It was military-specific application at the...
SolidWorks MBD.
Yeah. But the thought process is in my head that in today's society of a fabrication standpoint, why do we have drawings at all? If you're a laser guy, here's a model. Why are we making the drawings? Why are we printing the drawings? If you know what shiny side is up or down, or how can we communicate that on the model, isn't there a venue that would save a whole lot of people a whole lot of work, and just, you're cutting the model anyway, what's the point? And whether that's plus or minus the thousandths or 5,000ths, I can't really tell that anybody cares. They laser cut it and measure it afterwards to see if it's in spec. I don't know if the laser actually gets a different setting if it's 1,000ths versus 5, although everybody feels good about it. They're also darn accurate these days. They're all within 5 and nobody cares. So why are we even making drawings at all anymore?
And without we're out of time.
I mean, on certain parts, you know?
We actually do create drawings, whether it's a simple flat, it could be a disc. We'll create a drawing for it. And the primary reason is so that drawing can follow the traveler, the work order, router, whatever you want to call it, through the process. It'll go through the laser, it'll go through QA, and if necessary, get all the way to shipping. So that if there's any question about what this part number is, there's a picture of it, because not everybody has access to the CAD data.
Can't you print out a 3D picture and staple it to it?
That's pretty much what it is.
It takes money to shade it.
It's a copy of the print. And, you know, like I said, it follows that given chart through all our processes. If it stopped at the laser and they had 100% confidence that I didn't roof up that disc when I drew it, we'd be good. But unfortunately, I make mistakes. And more often than not, we have drawings that do travel on the floor for the loaders, for the blade operator, or the guy who saw.
They don't have a screen.
They don't have a screen in front of us, right? So to have that paper copy traveling with the parts and the routing to the parts part of the process is next, that helps everybody keep things going down the right path. So
Practically speaking, even if you made the drawing with no dimensions, would it serve the same purpose?
We are out of time, but Joe brought up one question that I really want to get McAuther's like five word sentence answer. Okay. So Joe talked about part numbers. McAuther, what is the best part number scheme of the solid? Five word sentence.
5 words. There it is in the best.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.